So this next session is sharing in practice in the context of the public sector. We're going to draw some recommendations from this document, which is available in the stand outside, also those who are following us on live stream online. And that is, of course, the sharing and reuse framework for IT solutions. I want to kick off this session with a subject or a topic which I particularly like, and that is my mother. And I think, like everyone's mother, the dictum is always, it is better to share. Yeah. The other point which I think some of our mothers also have said is that you can do something together, but you can also do something great with others. So I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the segue to the first session, which was about building out the policy, building out the open standards, building the political awareness and leadership to sort of unlock the potential of open source, but also the open way of doing things. We mentioned this extraordinary community of 15 million community developers and growing. And it's that magic sauce, that magic recipe that we want to really tease apart today with our panel and explore how you develop, how you create that kind of community. I think what also we're finding in the discussion is that we're increasingly moving away from the focus on the excellence of the code or the maturity of the licensing, but more towards how you develop that kind of collaborative culture, which does this extraordinary open innovation. So with that, I'm going to invite our first panelist, Stefano, up to the lectern to kick us off. But I think perhaps just a little bit of housekeeping before we do so is that we have fairly limited amounts of time. So we have about 9 minutes per speaker. This fedora turns into a kind of, this, I think it's a Goldfinger, the odd job. So at 9 minutes, it can be launched as a weapon. I think the other thing is we really want lots of comments and questions. We have this application works up, so please use that. We'll try and get to as many of those as possible. But of course, as Mary was saying at the kickoff, that this framework is really continually being updated, and so we're going to gather together that kind of input and put it into action in terms of the next generation of this document. So Stefano is the CTO, co-founder of Software Heritage. He's also an associate professor of computer science and a former board member of the OSI and also a Debian project lead. So the floor is yours.
Thanks. So, is this? No, this. Okay. So, hi, hello. I'm here to talk about Software Heritage, which is a project we are running in a team in Paris to actually archive all the source code we can find and how it relates in general to finding and sharing and also archiving software that is produced by public administration. So, real quick, the main idea of what we are doing with Software Heritage is essentially to preserve, collect, and share all the source code of software we can find. So the idea is that we are a big crawler looking for essentially free and open source software, looking at the source code version of the software and archiving it for the very long term. We're doing that for mainly three reasons. The first reason has already been mentioned on this stage, is that there is essentially no central place where you can go and search code that you might want to reuse for public administration or for other needs. This is because developers develop stuff using a number of different forges, and even though today GitHub might be the most popular solution for developers, there is a long tail of other places where development happen, and if you want to find source code, you need this central place. Essentially, think of the search engine for source code. The second reason we are doing that is that essentially code can be lost. As all digital information, it can be lost for a number of reasons. For instance, forges the developer use for development can be shut down. That has already happened with things like Gitorius or things like Google Code. And essentially, where do you go if the source code, if the repository for the source code you depend on goes away? Okay? So we are providing essentially a wayback machine for software which is developed publicly and available today. And third, we are trying to build a very large research infrastructure. Think of the equivalent of the CERN, where a researcher can go and run experiment on the largest corpus of available source code that we are archiving. So we are essentially focusing on only one thing, which is the preservation of source code together with its development history. And we're trying to do that based on a firm set of solid principles. So first of all, the technology we develop ourselves for doing the archival is itself free and open source software. And we develop the archive itself in the same way we develop open source project in general. Second, we identify everything we archive, every single artifact we archive with a persistent identifier that anyone can check for integrity. So you do not need to rely on third-party resolvers for figuring out where some piece of code we archive is or whether it has been corrupted or not over time. And third, we are a non-profit endeavor, so it's not backed by a specific company, and we are a multi-stakeholder organization. I'm going to come back later in some of our partners. So this is what we're doing. Essentially, we are a big crawler. Just a couple of quick technical slides. We crawl a number of places where open source software development happens. So of course, we crawl the big names like GitHub or GitLab.com, but we also crawl smaller instances of those forges that individual institutions might have set up. We also crawl package managers like Python package managers, JavaScript package managers, Debian source code, Debian source packages, and so on and so forth. And we collect all of those. We periodically crawl those places to find the repository and packages that are available there. And then periodically for each repository or each package we know about, we go there and check whether there is some new code or some new development activity that has happened there. And the peculiarity of the way we're doing this is that our data structure is essentially a big unified graph where everything is deduplicated. So essentially, if we find a single source code file in multiple places, we store it only once. If we find a single commit, a single version of a project being released that has been published in many different places, think the repository on GitHub, the corresponding package on PyPy, that kind of stuff, we only store it once. And this is key because it allows to see where some code you have released end up being used. So for instance, you do have a graph of forks on GitHub, but what if some code that the public administration have developed end up being used in a different place, in a place which is not on GitHub, or in a random package you haven't heard about? In our view, in our graph, you have this big picture of where code is moving and where forks of existing code actually go. So this is just something we have developed since the past 3 to 4 years. It's actually already today the largest archive of source code and development activity that exists in the world. We have archived more than 5 billion unique source code files, more than 1 billion commits, coming from these days more than 90 million different development projects. We have the usual name, so we have a full mirror of GitHub itself, which is periodically kept up to date. We have GitLab.com, we have the Debian distribution, we have historical archives that do not exist anymore, like Google Code or Gitorius. We have GNU tarbles, we have PyPy, and it's a logo that is still missing here. We have the NPM package manager, and we are increasingly adding more coverage to this software archive. It's a big thing. It's something like 200 terabytes of raw files plus all the metadata, and it's already today the largest archive of this kind, and it's something which is completely publicly accessible. So you can go to archive.softwareheritage.org, you can play in the web browser to find code you have developed to check if it is archived, and you also have an API to actually see how often we are crawling code that you might care about. So why it is relevant for us today? So I'm going to mention 2 highlights on why I think this ties in with the need of public administration to actually share and reuse code. The first one is that I think the public administration, like everyone developing code, has an interest in maximizing the impact of the code they release. So this crowd do not need any convincing that the first starting point is to release that code as free and open source software. So you're probably familiar with this fortunate campaign of the FSFE, Free Software Foundation Europe, about public money, public code. So if it is software developed using public money, it should be released as free and open source software. So that's step 1. The second step is how do you maximize the impact of that code? So first, you need to release that software where developers are. And this is why most public administrations today go and have a presence on GitHub or other popular forges. So that's okay if you want to create a community and reach out and find a contributor and obtain contributors from others. That's the place you want to be. But the second thing is that you need to care about what happens in the very long term to your code. You need to keep in mind this is something that I see is frequently overlooked, that development platforms are not archives. So we have seen 4Gs come and go. In the very long term, this might happen to 4Gs that are popular today. So I encourage you in your guidelines for releasing public code to think about long-term archival of your stuff and to make measures, make sure that your code is findable and it's referenced via identifiers that you can always resolve in the future. So essentially, I encourage you to reach out both in space, so go where the communities are, and in time. Think about posterity. Think about the findability of the source code you release today in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. And the second thing is that we do have a need, and this has been mentioned several times on this stage already today, to actually have some sort of a global library, a global catalog, if you want, of public code. Code that is free and open source software and that's been released and developed by public administration. So there are various ways to do that. So I think that the way to go is actually to mutualize the crawling part, so have a place that knows where source code is, and this is, of course, the mission that we are set for ourselves at Software Heritage. And second, make sure that the software you release at public administration is actually properly tagged. So there are various existing software ontologies you can use to tag your software. There are a bunch of them. There is a code meta initiative that actually translate among them. We have heard about the public code.yaml initiative that I think other people are going to describe in more detail later on today as well. And the idea is that make sure the software you release is tagged with some well-known and as standard as possible ontology. And second, make sure it is properly indexed by source code search engine. So this is something we have started to do. So if you go on our blog, you'll find a recent article describing our efforts in extracting metadata from more than 80 million software projects. For now, we are extracting metadata typical of the Python ecosystem, of the JavaScript, of the Ruby, and of the Java ecosystem. But essentially, we can extend the indexing to also support things like public code.yaml and give you a search engine that can allow you to search all code that has ever been released by public administration as free software and properly tagged as such. So these were my two key messages for today. Just a couple of things before concluding. So we were not alone in what we're doing. So we're backed by a number of institutions. So we are in partnership with UNESCO, and we have essentially we are one of the main mission of UNESCO in terms of long-term preservation of source code. And we have released earlier on last year. Sorry, we released at the end of last year the Paris Call that highlights the important role of source code preservation for long-term sustainability and development of countries. And second, so we're a bunch of institutions sharing our vision from free software, from scientific institutions, and we would love to work with you as well to make sure your code is actually archived and findable for the very long term. So thanks a lot, and the stage is for the next.
Very good. I've just been looking at the app to see whether people are putting comments and so on, so please, I encourage you to do so. Stefano mentioned the go in space and time to find code. And interestingly, the next speaker I see on his CV, Astronomy Exploring Time and Space, Arizona State University, so quite a coincidence there. So if I can encourage you, ask you, Francesco, to take the lectern. Francesco is the Director General for Resources of an Italian region, Emilia-Romagna, and he's responsible for procuring everything from pencils to cutting-edge DevOps technology. So the floor is yours.
Good morning. I come from Emilia-Romagna, and it is a northern region in Italy, an advanced region. We have also the presidency of the Conference of the Region in Italy, so our example, our behavior in open source 2 is an example for all the regional government in Italy and also for local authorities. We use the 50% of IT solution like open source. I show here many of the solutions like server, middleware, custom application, web content management system, Plone. We promote also the Plone community. So we met last month many municipalities that use Plone. And we use also, and we accept the vendor solution only is necessary for us. So like SAP, Microsoft, Google, and IBM and Oracle. We have many applications in open source, like Docker is an application for management document. We use Francesco. Self is a platform for training, continuous training for employees, public employees. This platform, using Moodle, produce 4,000 products per year. So it's very populated and auto-populated by the people for this vision of continuous training. Demetra, Federa for local ID, and but now we are this platform Federa is shared in origin with all other regions like Veneto, Marche, Umbria, and now we are attending SPID, the new national ID accreditation. Other platforms are that, for example, Cider is a platform for find a work for the job seeking in a public job seeking sector in Emilia-Romagna. Furthermore, we shared also some customization of SAP, for example. No? SAP is not an open code, but we shared also. Those examples for concentrate about a concept of platform, what we want to mean with platform. Platform is a virtual or physical space where the people can share experiences, knowledge, and generate new content. So this is our goal, generate platforms, and conceive also platform during the time. In Emilia-Romagna, we count 310 municipalities now, 9 departments, 12 health public companies, and also the regional administration. That means we are talking about 60,000 employees in the local public sector. You must know that in our region, all healthcare system is public, is quite public. So that means there are many people that have several specializations, doctors and also, I don't know, engineers, etc. Therefore, we must implement solutions for convince the persons who are working that we can change and implement many projects of change management. No? This is our job. And all time we introduce a new solution, like a new platform, the people resist at the beginning. So we must convince these people that this platform should be an opportunity during the time for sharing experiences and also knowledge, no? Like the self-platform I mentioned before. So I want to say that it's a matter of human capital and not only about technology. This is my point of view. I'm not a technician. So from my point of view, we can reach a new broad approach to reuse. I don't know if reuse is only open source. Reuse is a concept and a new approach for public management, maybe, and also not only public management. For example, now we are debating about a new law in our regional parliament about big data. And we are hosting also, we are the owner of hosting the new Cherenkov telescope array. Cherenkov telescope array is an ERIC, an European ERIC, and this structure coordinates 180 telescopes in the northern and the southern hemisphere. And the reason why these structures now is in Bologna is because in Bologna we are building a new big data technopole where we can share this data and contemporary, we can apply the artificial intelligence in the visual artificial intelligence for recognizing galaxies and stars, etc. So we need also this technology. We are also the honor for hosting the European Weather Forecast Agency that is leaving the United Kingdom in the perspective of Brexit, and also this agency will be in Bologna, and we are investing 50 million of regional money, of regional resources for this new huge technopool, where 100,000 square meters for hosting all the structure, European structure, and also we just won the European call of HPC, is a Presa scale machine, one of the most power machine for extract and storage data, in this case dedicated to the nuclear physics. So our vision is build a platform also here with the physical instruments, and also investing more than 300 million money, because we want to realize in Bologna a data valley for the digital transformation of public administration, university, the oldest university in the world, Bologna, and other university in our region, and that should be an opportunity for the entire Southern Europe. Thank you. This is a code. This is after the invention of printing. This is one of the first example of digital, because it is one of the first example of the transcription of music and reusable music transcribed. This book is in the Fonte Avellana Abbey in the center of Italy. So we must think to the other revolution in the history for interpret our future, and maybe for find a position for European Union when we are assisting to this conflict between China and United States, and it is a matter of data. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. You mentioned the University of Bologna, which of course is the oldest university in the world. And I think the whole concept of reuse, frankly, if it hadn't been deployed from the outset, then the University of Bologna, or any university for that matter, would have been dead long time ago. The whole concept of sharing and reuse is nothing new. I think what's interesting, it's taken several hundred years to then have it seen in a code way in terms of the Richard Stallman's GNU project and what happened after that. So thank you, Francesco. Brilliantly on time. I wanted to go next to Boris, who will be our third speaker. Boris is the Open Source Development Manager for SCORE, which he's going to tell you a lot about over the next 9 minutes. In addition to that, he's also open source advisor to the City of Amsterdam and Chief Executive to the Foundation for Public Code. So Boris, the floor's yours. Thank you.
All right. Hello everyone. Thanks for being here. I hope this is me, clearly.
Sorry.
I'm going to go a bit more personal than most of the speakers here, because I'm going to give some background to sort of also how I got into all of this. And it kind of started when I was a young kid, and I really didn't fit in school. I couldn't keep up with what the teachers were telling me to do, and I really started doubting, am I stupid? Can I just not human? Can I not be a normal person? And then I found the internet, and that was really a revelation for me, because I found out that not only could I decide what I learned myself and go look for it myself, whenever I got stuck with something, I could find other people that would help me overcome those barriers. And with that, I started programming. I started using this little dude over here, this wizard. One of my first programs was a Microsoft agent program that had the little wizard do basic automation tasks. And that inspiration just kept on going. And a few years back, I was thinking hey, why don't municipalities and public administrations do open source? Why don't they really collaborate on infrastructure together as much? And in that sort of train of thought, I got into talking with the city of Amsterdam, and they were like, hey, it's great, like, let's try and figure this out, but please come and work with us to start our open source program. And in that process, figuring out how to do open source, I came across this SCORE project, and really latched onto that as something that we could use to create these kind of transformations. So what is SCORE? SCORE is a collaboration of 15 partners, of which 9 are cities. There are some academic partners in there. There's a science park in there. And all these cities, they're all in the North Sea region. This is co-funded with the Interreg North Sea region fund. So they fund 50% of what we're doing in SCORE. And they are very, even though they're all in sort of northwestern Europe, they're still very, very diverse organizations with very diverse cultures and very diverse languages and very diverse ways of looking at things also. Structures, very different. And so we've tried to create a partnership out of these. And so when we started out this project, which is about 2 years ago, our ambitions were that we would just figure out by asking citizens what all their problems were, and then we could just put those problems next to each other. And that would make it clear to us and obvious what solutions we had to develop. And that would be easy because we had development teams, so we could just stick them together and then they would build something. And then, of course, our solutions would be replicated all over Europe. And we did this all with the ambition to improve public service delivery. And we thought that technology would be the hard part. Like, we spend, in the beginning, so much time talking about data portability, about whether we're going to use GitHub or GitLab or Docker or OpenStack infrastructures, how to manage sort of the collaborative backlog so that we can make all the features and share one common process, and really like figure out how to decide on this common technical infrastructure. But we actually quite quickly found out that it was not the technology which was the problem, because that was something that we could figure out. What was actually the problem was the understanding each other, talking to each other, understanding what each other's problems were. And so we came to this realization that cultural interoperability is as important as technical interoperability. And we came to the realization that open source isn't as much about code or about licenses or these kind of things, but it is mostly about community. It is mostly about being open, sharing your problems with each other, sharing your process with each other, and coming to collective improvements. And this all to create a shared code base that you can work on with each other and that you can use with each other. So I have some practical examples. One is something which came out of that initial phase of trying to ask people for what their problems were and trying to map them. And Ghent and Digipolis Ghent, which is their IT organization, along with some other SCORE partners, worked on creating a mapping infrastructure. In the beginning, there were some iterations which were Word documents, and then there were some Excel documents, and that sort of like created this software solution, which is still very basic. It's still, in a way, a glorified spreadsheet, but it's a way to create a clear idea of what the problems in an organization are. And the interesting effect of this hasn't necessarily been that we've, as a consortium, been able to collect each other's problems well and cluster around that, but also that the IT department of the city of Ghent and the city of Ghent have changed their relationship. They used to be the city of Ghent would give an assignment to the IT department and they would go build it. And because this flipped that around by saying the IT department will go into the city to see what the needs are, that really changed that relationship, going from a reactive way of working towards a proactive way of working. The Drainage and Flood Risk Management Group is another group in SCORE, which is very different, like all groups in SCORE are. And they're Aberdeen and Bradford, with Bradford University and Amsterdam Data Science. And they are basically talking about how do we solve drainage and flood risk problems. And this started with discussions about sort of data inventory and technical infrastructure and what's there and architectural mapping. But quite quickly, it sort of boiled to the surface that in our conversations that we were having with each other, that our problems were actually problems which were on a deeper level. They had to do with what kind of patterns of thought we were having, or what kind of procurement we were envisioning, and how we were envisioning working together in that. And I think this is a really interesting project because it was started by Aberdeen and Bradford University, and during the process of finding out sort of what they were doing, because we had open collaboration, and in SCORE everything happens on one internet forum that's open to the world to see, because all of the discovery happened in the open, other partners were able to come into that and see like, oh, we can add to this, we can add value to this. For instance, this little dam over here is posted by Sid on the community, is a dam that's managed by the watershed Hardenmoor. And it's a dam which you can see is not very high tech. However, it is a very important dam and it needs to be monitored. So Amsterdam Data Science worked on a way to monitor it with computer vision. And then finally, a more recent project, GeoNet Baken, which is about the tracking the road blockages in the city by putting a sensor on every pylon that's on the street to direct traffic. And with that, they can really figure out like, oh, this is where roads are blocked off, and this is how that works. It started by Hamburg, very much driven by Hamburg, but since they worked open and they involved everyone in the consortium, they were able to build a coalition around this and get more people to working with this. And I think in this project, it really shows how valuable it is, not just to communicate between developers, but also to involve other stakeholders. Like in the last group, there was people from water management. Here there's people from traffic management. There's people from the economic department of the city. And they're all working together in order to figure out like, what is the solution that we need and how are we going to get that to work. So again, the key to unlocking value in a lot of these things is when building collaborations to be open, because it's the only way you're ever going to find alignment and find problems that everyone wants to solve. When discussing a common problem, be open to share discoveries and learnings, because that will enable you to leverage everyone else's strengths. It will enable you to know what's really going on in that. And when working on solutions, to be open, because you need diverse stakeholders involved. You cannot just say, as a policy person, invent some piece of technology, give it to the technologists, and then they'll go make it. Because that's not how it works. Like, you need to collaborate every step of the way. And so in order to work together at that scale, it is very important that all of us and all of our organizations understand the importance of open source, not as a technological thing, but as a cultural change. And this was great to hear that the Commission, for instance, also is thinking about using open source methodologies for more than just software. And we're finding that even to build software, we need to use open source methodologies in more than just software, because development of software is not isolated in a little bubble. No, it is part of the job that we all do. And so cultural interoperability is as important as technical interoperability, and we need to keep that in mind. Recently, one of the things which kind of came out of SCORE as well is the Foundation for Public Code, where we're trying to create an open source foundation for public code and public software. One of the things that we've been doing is work with the Italian digital team on the public code.yaml standard that I would really love everyone here to adopt, and also to join us in further developing that. So please go talk to Alessandro or to me about that. And also we are trying to figure out like how can we help public administrations do stewardship of communities and software development. And we have this document about how policymakers, managers, and designers and developers can work on that I'd be glad to help you one out as well.
I'm going to have to nudge you a little bit, otherwise the fedora Goldfinger moment comes in. Thank you. If you'd like to put your hands together, thank you. Lovely. So next up we have Bogdan. It's great to have some local flavor. Romania has an extraordinary STEM set of credentials, and Bogdan's going to be talking to us about that and some of the projects that he's been building out in Romania as CEO and founder of Code for Romania. So, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, James. And I don't know how many of you are following the Romanian news, but the last 4 years were marked by an increase of activity in civil society in Romania, an increase in people wanting to get engaged with the public institutions a bit more. So out of this mold came Code for Romania, and what started as me and a couple of other friends is now an organization with more than 800 volunteers, which makes us one of the top 3 civic tech communities in the world. And our objective was, from the beginning, and it still is, to put technology at work to solve social problems in Romania. And while our main effort comes in support of civil society in Romania, we could not ignore the public sector. And one of our main programs to date is labeled Update Romania. And what we do under the label of Update Romania is we help public institutions with pro bono work of our organization and our community to build those apps that help them in 3 important ways. Either to better engage citizens, what we call input, to be more transparent, what we call output, or to be more efficient in their work, what we call throughput. And I also want to introduce you to a metaphor that I like to use for projects in general, but for IT projects in particular in the last 2 years. And I think a project is like a tree. It can look amazing and garner excitement, and you see a very nice, round, and beautiful tree on the outside. But if there are no roots, or the roots do not take hold because maybe there's not enough water, there's not enough feeding, or have not found proper ground to grow, the tree fades away. And so the biggest effort at Code for Romania is finding those solutions that build roots. And how do we do this? It's our first and foremost strategic option is using open source. And I'm not going to repeat what everybody said today about why open source is good in public administration. I'm just going to add one more voice to what public administration understands best is less taxpayer money put in software development. And I'm going to speak a bit about how it also helps the civil society, because as many of you know, the funding is little in civil society, to say the least. Organizations are fragile and volatile, and if we look over the board anywhere in the world, we see that they have a higher than usual rate of burning out, either at the individual level, the project level, or even the organizational level. So in this context, building open source software ensures that those products can survive the death of the organization, maybe the dismembering of a team there, or the finishing the funding. So those projects can live to fight another day. And we always stress this when we talk to both public administration, but also to civil society. And I would like to add here that when we build for common good, being in public administration or civil society, competition has no place because we're looking for the public good. So open source is the natural response in software development. And the second pillar that we have for building better roots is applying a methodology that we developed at Code for Romania and we put under the name of Civic Labs. So what we want to do is, before we write the first line of code, we want to make sure that we bet our best bets that that project will work. And we can do this by, first and foremost, research and taking time with that project. So what we do is we first and foremost bring the stakeholders together around the topic. And that means public institutions, that means NGOs, that means experts, that means academia. It also means the users in the end. And we sit with them in focus groups, we sit with them in interviews, and we try to map which are the main problems that they're facing, the main pain points that they have in their area of expertise. And then we go with that knowledge back to our office and we validate that through statistical research. And we have also a nice part of the research phase, which we call tech research, where we look at the problem that we have and we go around the world and see how others solved it. And if we can learn something from that, if we can adopt part of it, we will do it. And that's where open source helps again. So I will try to give you a few examples of what came out of Civic Labs in terms of cooperation with public authorities in Romania. And the first project that we built in partnership with the Ministry of Justice of Romania was built in partnership with the Ministry of Justice in Romania. And Romanian citizens perceive corruption as one of the main problems that the country is facing. The Ministry of Justice has been collecting for over 3 years a number of variables, dozens of variables, across all public institutions in Romania, measuring corruption practices in those public institutions. What we wanted to make sure is that that data will not just go into a report that will stay in a PDF format or will just be on a paper somewhere in the ministry. So what we did, we invested all our effort to transform that data into information. Information that any citizen can use, that they can digest down on a commute or on a Saturday evening, and information that they can understand. And this is part of one of our main roles at Code for Romania, transforming data into information. The second project we are working on is also with the Ministry of Justice, with an institution called ANABI, or in English is the agency dealing with confiscated assets. So out of corruption cases and all other criminal cases comes an effort to confiscate assets. And we are building a complex system through which the agency can manage those assets, and also a system through which they can understand the pattern that they're facing. Because right now they don't have the data to really understand that. And on the other side, we're also offering the people complete transparency at how those assets are being frozen across the country and what's happening to the assets that are being managed by ANABI. A third project we're building in cooperation with the Ministry of Interior and World Bank, and replies to one of the biggest questions that people living in Bucharest and the cities of Southeast Romania have. When is the next earthquake gonna come? And really the most important question is, are we prepared for the next big earthquake? And the first part of being prepared for an earthquake is knowing what you can use the next day, being people, volunteers, management systems, or any other resources like tents, blankets, anything. And right now it's a pen to paper affair, and in the best case scenario, an Excel affair in Romania. So we're transforming that into a system through which the Ministry of Interior can manage that in real time after any kind of disaster. And to wrap up, I want to speak a bit about what I think is our most strategic and most important project that we're doing in cooperation with public authorities. And its name is Data Portal, and the name speaks for itself. It is a data portal. And I will add on what Boris was saying. The tech part is just the tip of an iceberg. It's the easiest part of any project that we're doing, especially with a data portal. Anybody that worked on one knows that it's not a big deal to develop, to technically develop such a portal. But where do you get the data? That's the main question. Where do you get data that is consistent, data that is clean, and data that can really be used by public authorities, companies, or NGOs in that city? And as a social scientist, I can say that by far the biggest problem of Romania is the lack of data reliability or data cleanliness. And you can understand that no good project can ever be built on bad data, first and foremost. And secondly, every day without good data is a day when public officials don't take the best decisions. So that is why we started building that platform, and we started building it.
Bogdan, I'm giving you special privileges now. You're a couple of minutes over just because you're Romanian. So carry on, but you need to close.
I see 2 minutes there.
That started. It's not correct.
So, yeah. So I'll run through it, and we brought in 2 of the biggest municipalities in Romania. It's Cluj and Timișoara, to work on this project. So we have the developers, we have the data. Where do we get the data scientists? So we brought in the 2 universities in these cities to come with the manpower of social scientists to clean the data and to audit the data that the municipality has and to bring it to a quality that can go into the data portal. And the best part of it is that this is the first project in Romania which is shared and reused by more than one public institution. So we start with 2 municipalities. We hope to add a 3rd municipality soon, the municipality of Iași. And we're now thinking of a system through which we can include smaller municipalities through maybe EU grants that the bigger municipalities can get.
Very good. Thank you. And Bogdan, whilst you're walking towards your seat, just to think about an answer to a question we got in, which is how the European Commission can, in very practical terms, better collaborate with and leverage initiatives as ones presented in this session. So just put that in your pipe and smoke leisurely on it, and we get to that in the Q&A. So next up is Jean-Paul. I think I got that right. I called him Jean-Pierre earlier, and he said there was a famous pope. Remember that way, so I'm doing it. He is an open source technical expert, like Stefan and Boris, with software design and developer experience in both the private sector and also more recently in the Belgian government, which is a real champion for open source, and then more recently in the DG Digit at the European Commission. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Belgian, so I'm supposed to get 2 minutes less, maybe. Okay. So, as you said, I spend a lot of time in my career dealing with the lack of interoperability at different layers. So I wrote connectors to connect systems together. I had to deal with data transformation because of the lack of semantic interoperability, improving business processes, but legal interoperability remains a main barrier to achieve the overall interoperability of cross-border systems. So the Commission, by following our principle of interoperability by design, we try to build an instrument to contribute to the establishment of this legal interoperability. This instrument is the EUPL, so the EU Public License, which provides a common legal instrument which is valid in all EU member states and in all 23 languages. That's very good, but unfortunately, EUPL is far from being the unique instrument in this world. There is about 350 licensed texts, which are all different and more or less compatible. So it's difficult to choose because today's solutions combine different software components which come from member states, but also from outside, and mainly from the US. So we have to deal with a lot of US licenses that we inherited or that are imposed by the different components we reuse. So there's still a lot of licensing issues when applying sharing and reuse of software. Now, the question for people developing solutions is, okay, which license do I need to choose? And that's not an easy question. There exist some tools to help making this decision, but we found out that none of those tools were either complete or easy to use, especially for people like me who are techie people and not legal experts. So what we tried to achieve, we started a small project together with the other team and the Joinup team. We looked at what existed on the market. We looked also at solutions offered, for instance, in the EU data portal for the data licenses. And our goal was to provide a tool which is easy to use, simple, user-friendly, and reusing existing tools and standards. We want this to become a reference instrument, and we want it to evolve and being improved within the UPL and the Joinup community to improve its quality and to widen its usage. So what is Joinup? Joinup is the platform where you will find this licensing assistant. And okay, most of you probably use daily Joinup, but for the one of two behind who don't know it, Joinup is basically a repository of shared and reused solutions for the public sector. But it's also a collaborative platform where people can interact around communities that we call collections in the platform. It's also an observatory, so you will find news, best practices, etc., around the different solutions and collections. And Joinup is also a solution which can be reused as such. So the source code of Joinup is openly available, and if a member state, a region, or whatever wants to create its own platform repository of shared solutions, he can download our code and reuse it and contribute to it if he wants. So, by the way, all solutions that will be presented this afternoon for the award are, of course, present on Joinup, so you will find all the information there. So what did we do to build this, this DLA? We looked at existing initiatives from key organizations. So there is the open source initiative. They establish a categorization of licenses based on a criteria: is this license open source or not? So is it compliant with the 10 OSS principles? On the other hand, we had the Free Software Foundation. They have what we call a self-centric criteria. So they say, okay, this license is good or bad for the promotion of the free software movement and philosophy. Then we looked at SPDX, so the Software Package Data Exchange Standard, which is a standard to describe different components like licenses, copyrights, etc. And we found out that SPDX was maintaining a full list of all existing license texts that's being kept up to date, so we decided to reuse this. We have this assistant based on proven categories. So first of all, we have the traditional categories based on the content of the license text. So what can you do, the permissions, what are your obligations and what you cannot do, the prohibitions, if you use that type of license. And then we added some new categories, like the compatibility or the interoperability. So the legal environment, which are the applicable laws, and the support this license might have. Is it supported by a strong community, by government, etc., etc. And we end up with this Joinup licensing assistant that will enable you to identify what is the suitable license for distributing your software or data. Also, if we want to reuse a solution, you can use this tool also to see what are your obligations if you want to reuse this piece of code. So it's a common tool that can include up to 348 licenses, which is all the list from the SPDX licenses. We introduced this improved categorization, and we provide also a direct link to the full license text, and this way we have up-to-date information. So I have a little demo of the tool really quickly. I still have 1:44. If you can launch the video. Thank you. So you're on Joinup. You will see this tool. We have currently 36 licenses that are mapped with those categories. So we forgot all the obsolete and retired license text. There are some licenses that are not relevant for the Joinup community, and there is some analysis in progress. So what you have the 6 categories I just mentioned. You can choose a criteria in the category. You have some tooltips to explain you what it means, and then you see it will be filtered. So here, with this criteria, I end up with 3 licenses. For each license, you have, for the categories, the different criteria, a comment, and a link to the full license text. If I add another filter, okay, I end up with only 1 license left, which correspond to my 2 criteria selected. You can reset this. The other way to filter is through the name of the license, what we call the SPDX identifier. So if I search for EU, I end up with 2 licenses which have this letter in their name, the UPL, the 2 versions of UPL. Clicking there, I end up with the full text as maintained by SPDX. So it's a link to their site. We don't reinvent this. And you will find the license comment, which is a kind of user-friendly resume of what is the license about. My time is up. Just want to add that it is released, it is available as of today, actually yesterday on Joinup. This is a first version, and as I said, we want this to be a collaborative effort and a common instrument. So please react to this. We know we still have to improve some wording, some explanations, etc. So feel free to comment on the news item on Joinup or to contact us using the support form. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. There were a couple of questions came in. One was about how to openly discuss ideas and share experience between public administrations in Europe. Well, join up. Join up. Okay, to our next speaker. So, yes, Maha has got somewhat of an impressive academic research record in multiple universities, and really with a focus around unlocking the potential of open. There are a number of questions about this, and very subject, so very timely. I don't know whether they were strategically placed there, but if so, great. And talking about choke points, talking about sustainability, and that's exactly what Maha is going to be addressing. So, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get the mics to come down so to my height rather than the taller men. We've heard a lot about some really wonderful open source projects and some use in public sector, but also very specific details about projects themselves. My research is a little bit broader. I mean, in the sense that I've been looking at how companies, but also public sector organizations have been engaging with open source communities. I went into this research thinking, okay, so we know what a good community is, and so let's just go choose one, work with it, and what are the problems that actually come about when companies or public sector organizations, when they work with a community? Well, the interesting point that came out was that actually companies didn't know what was a good community. In fact, they were looking to us as academics to say, well, what do you think is a good community? Instead, so the research that started off with looking at just the engagement, where we had the pre-existing assumption that they've already chosen the community, they're working with them, and how do they maintain and keep it sustainable, we had to step back and say, okay, what is a good community? That was an extra 6 to 8 months of research, by the way, on an already rather large project. But it was actually the best time spent. What we did was we started speaking to a number of different companies, but also public sector organizations, to figure out, why did you choose the community that you did choose? So most of them would just say, oh, we kind of like the code. The code is good and it's useful. I mean, that's pragmatic, reasonable, completely functional, so why not? Absolutely have no problem with that. But there must be something beyond that as well. I mean, how do you just choose it on functionality? So when I pressed them for an answer on when you had a number of products that were fairly identical in functionality, then how did you go about choosing the product and the community that came with it? This sort of paused a little bit more and said, well, I kind of like one of the guys. I knew one of the guys that worked in the community, and he was friendly. I wrote to him. I got a response from him, which was really important for these guys. So suddenly started triggering that when we talk about a community and when we talk about sustainability, you have to step back a little bit more and think about sustainability. I really like Bogdan's example of the tree. It's a metaphor, but very useful, especially if you think about all the recent research that's come out about trees, or how the roots actually speak to each other and sustain even the weaker saplings. That was really, I mean, I don't know if you've heard about that research, but it was very, very interesting. I can't remember which channel I watched, and I watched too much television. So figuring out how they actually work with each other, that for me is a sustainable ecosystem. Taking care of each other, talking to each other, collaborating, communication. So this is most of the research. Today what I'm going to speak about is probably far more about choosing the right community, because I think that's the most crucial first step towards then building a sustainable community, because in fact, if you haven't chosen the right one, you don't know what a sustainable one is in the first place. All right, so that's where I'm taking it. And so why, yeah, I kind of preempted that question already. Well, I thought this quote would resonate. You can't have a community. We take a product from an open source community and we want to use it only for back office use. We're not going to redistribute it. We're not going to do anything with secondary adoption of it, but just back office use. Even if we do that, we need upgrades, right? Do we have the manpower in our own organization to be able to support that product? So in some sense, even just picking up a product and simply using it means you're investing in it. So when you invest in the product, and we've heard so many times today, and not just from this panel, but from many of the other first panel as well, a lot more about how community is so completely relevant. You need to invest in the community, right? So that's the essence of this. Which community is best to invest in? How do we judge the worth of a community? Which one is good? And of course, it's contextual as well. Some are good for us, not so good for other people. So you've got to make the right decision as to your own context of your own organization as well. But then, of course, how do we ensure the health of that community? We choose a good one. Do we, by engaging with it, actually kill it in the process? Now, we know that's happened. That's happened a lot, okay? Especially with corporate involvement with open source communities. Things didn't go so well a couple of years ago. I mean, it's much better now, but it really, we had lots of projects that either the companies began, didn't go so well, they became very dictatorial, or they started engaging with an open source community and the community decided, you know what, we don't like you. We're just going to redirect our code into a different direction. It's no longer going to be useful to you. You're going to just leave us alone. So that was another approach. So communities do have a way of fighting back. Now, is it in the self-interest of a community to have sponsorship from companies and public sector? Of course. I mean, we all know that a large number of open source projects die very, very quickly. So here we are talking about community, building it, sustaining it. Biggest problem being because sustainability is a real nightmare, right? Trying to keep it going. How do you sustain it? So this is the definition that one of my co-authors and I, we've crafted for one of our academic papers. It's academic, so I'm not going to foist that on you. It might be a little bit dry, but I hope that there's some use value for you as well. What we call a healthy community, and you'll notice we talk about the product, but also the community, and they're intertwined. It's a viable but organizational friendly community, all right? It's not just a community. If it's ideologically really strong, there's going to be friction, all right, with the companies and with public sector as well, by the way, that consistently, all right, produce high quality, innovative products and services. So that's our understanding of what a healthy community is. By the end of this presentation, and looking at the time, and I seem to speak much more than I think I do. So this is being an academic, I'm sorry. I want to come to the end to a sustainable ecosystem, all right, so, or a healthy ecosystem. There are lots of tables in my presentation. They're there, and you will have access, I think, to the slides anyway. So I'm not going to bore you with going through each and every factor. What I do want you to pay attention to, if possible, is look at the titles even. When we think about what is a good community, we want to choose the right product. You know, that's the pragmatic decision. How do we choose the right product? And I think here we've understood things. You know, so product features, is it a fit? Software quality, documentation, and so forth. So many of these factors are commonplace, understood, and accepted. But a community's viability, of course, also means the vibrancy of the developer base. It doesn't just mean that you have a large code base and coders as well. You need something that has a high turnover in the periphery, but you have a nice core of developers who sustain the project and are determined because they're passionate about it. We've had a lot about projects here today, and many of those people have spoken with real passion about the work that they're doing. Friendliness to corporations. Now, I understand this, a lot of my research may well be more company-centric as well. However, I don't think that these factors aren't relevant to public sector, in which case I've actually left this table. What I think is one of the more useful ones, and that people tend to ignore sometimes, or maybe not pay as much attention to, which is the only one I'm going to look at in this table, is clear governance structures in the open source community. Whom are you going to be speaking to in that community? We know that as a corporation or even a public sector organization, mostly public sector organization, extremely hierarchical. You need to be able to talk to people directly, get the feedback, get the service, after-sale services, and so on. How do you corral an entire community to work with you, almost for you? Yes, you can put your people in, but corporations tend to have more money to do that. Public sector is a little bit less... well, the budgets are a little bit less available. How do I put this in a nice way? You know, I mean, they're tighter, right? So you've got to work within your own means. So what do? What I found is that the Linux project, very, very dictator-oriented, I don't care what anybody says here, all right, is one of the most dictatorially led projects, all right? You find a lot of company interest in it. It is not just because Linux is one of the older projects that happens to be true. A number of companies that we spoke to, their clear idea was they knew who they could speak to. It had a lot of really amazing core developers whom they could just hijack, basically get them into their employment for a little while as well. So there's lots of different ways that they can actually build relations with the community that make the product sustainable, but also the community as well. And then ecosystem. Now here it's more about, right, we've got a good product, we've got a good community that's happy to kind of work with us. Okay, now how do we make sure we signal to other people, other corporations, other public sector organizations that this is a good community? Well, by the very fact that you are putting resources into this community, in fact, is the signal to the rest of the ecosystem. What we found is that when IBM, or when Microsoft, or when I shouldn't perhaps have named any companies, but you can take any large company or small company that's invested in a serious way in an open source project. What you found is other companies began to sniff out quality, By the mere fact that this big company like Google perhaps was interested in this project, they also started putting resources in as well. By the fact that they were putting their own resources in as well and giving quality assurance, together they were actually building the community into health. So even if it hadn't started off so fantastic, it actually became absolutely amazing. So the interesting idea of the claim here is, from our research, that you can have a good product, make sure that the community works well enough and you can work with certain people in it. You can then build it, sustain it in a healthy way by building the ecosystem around it. Right? But choose the right one in the first place. And this, I promise you, is, this is my last slide, okay? So, how do you sustain? You choose the right community. Now that I put in single quotation marks. Of course, part of it is very contextual, but we have a set of criteria that we're offering that one can use. If it's right for you, then other organizations will probably think it might be right for them as well, especially if their needs are fairly similar. Joint investment of resources and risk-bearing means long-term sustainability of that project. And by putting in your resources, it means you can redirect the energy of that community to the way that you want the product to go. So in a way, it's actually indirect control in a very, very, well, you could say Machiavellian way, all right? It really is very strong to point the community in a particular way because your own people are making serious contributions to it, right? And that's how you gain reputation in an open source community. More organizations using an open source product is equal to sustained interest and sustained communities. Thank you. Sorry, that's a little.
So I very much like the real-time co-creation that took place between Maha and Bogdan around this almost inverted metaphor from an iceberg to a tree. So what's under the waterline, what's under the soil line is actually the most important part, and you should actually hug as opposed to the iceberg metaphor. So we have a number of questions which have come in, and I'm going to try to infuse those with some thoughts which I had whilst listening to folks. But I think what we should do is perhaps go sort of back to front. So Maha spoke last, and I think we'd like to carry on in that vein whilst it's still fresh. So I'm going to make another plug for this document here. Yeah. I'm not getting any commission on this at all. And that is there's a couple of the first three recommendations or so of this document are about business model predominantly. And the third one is quite explicit about adopting a business model to kind of address that sustainability of open source. So I'd like Maha to perhaps embellish or explain a little bit more detail about that. And the other is Francesco talked about his experience, insights on procuring IT solutions. Again, that's recommendation 5. And again, it'd be interesting to see the extent to which EU legislation, national legislation, which we talked about in session 1, helps do that, and whether it's open specifications, technical, or open standards, what have you. So those are the two sort of kickoff questions, if I may. We're a bit rushed for time, so sort of a minute or so each, that would be super.
Sure. If I think about business models, now I'm thinking very much public sector, so of course it's not about making a large amount of profit, but it's about keeping something sustainable. I suppose in the same sense, I'd still go back to context and say, what is useful? Why are you actually choosing this product? I mean, in many cases, what we find in corporations is that they take up an open source product to do something with it, and it's not necessarily to build that product up just for the product's sake, but it's more to undermine a competitor. In the same way, I suppose, in the public sector, you could do that in a way that you could take away attention from large projects that are more corporate friendly to be able to build up perhaps, the license, the EU license, to get more interest in the EU license. So I think in business models, of course, it's very contextual, and it needs to be related to the idea of what is your motivation. And then, I mean, if you had more, and I understand, of course, in this round we have to speak more broadly, but I think I could give you a more specific answer as to exactly what kind of business model out of the 4 large ones that most people talk about that would be most appropriate.
Great. Thank you. Francesco.
If I understood, when Europe can help, the building of the ecosystem or investment in general, we think the European Union must define the first thing is a strategy
for the treatment of data and in the next future, and also concentrate investment in a limited number of places, because many of these investments are spread out in many places, many fields, and when we are assisting to this conflict between China and the United States about Android, the using of Android, I cannot see the strategy of the European Union in this context. So our Big Data Technopole in Bologna, which cost 300 millions, and the European Union invested 250 millions, no, for applied mainly for the scientific fields, should be also an externality for firms, for new generations, and for many other fields that we cannot imagine now. This is an example for the Southern Europe, and not only for Italy, and not only for Bologna. And I think that is a good example for for contribute to the reaction to this condition for European Union. But I cannot see today a strategy of the European Union for build a platform for sharing knowledge and experiences for react to this innovation that we are looking.
Thank you, Francesco. So we have another question came up is, and it's a good question actually, is Joinup licensing assistant open for contribution? So Jean-Paul, over to you.
Sure. And we ask you to contribute to it. So as I said, this is first version that has been released today. We ask your feedback and we ask to contribute. So the same way as Maya, you mentioned that we should promote more the use of EUPL within the member states. Actually, that's what we are trying to do through the EUPL collection community on Joinup, which is, I think, currently about 130 people that have contributed. And we'd like to do the same with the licensing assistant, because we want it to be the reference instrument and to be user-friendly, and it's only the users that can tell us what should be improved and what is wrong and what should be changed.
Great, thank you. Stefano, I know you've got a technical background and your expertise very much in computer science, but like with most open source developers, they tend to be de facto lawyers because they've had to get their minds around the licensing, which then establishes that comfort zone, that freedom to develop and share without any concerns and constraints. Now that open source is an established, mature term of art, I'd be interested in your thoughts on, is there a risk of even a proliferation of licenses now? We have the OSI, FSF that was mentioned earlier. What's your thought on that particular line of thinking?
Yeah, so it used to be a problem, and to some extent it's coming back. I think, however, the historical answer that has been given to avoid the risk of incompatibilities when reusing and publishing free and open source software are actually still valid. So essentially, when you actually need to decide what to use as a simple user and maybe future contributors, and essentially make sure the list you're choosing has been approved by standard body. OSI, of course, come to mind, but double checking between OSI and FSF is actually also generally a good idea. And actually, to Jean-Paul, we have found in the wild in software heritage almost 900 different license stacks, so it's even worse than you actually mentioned before. But yeah, we can stick to the basics. Pick a license that has been vetted by some third-party bodies and pick some popular license. That's a good one. Back to Maha's point, the license is not only the ingredient you want to check. For instance, if you are a public administration, you don't want to depend on software which is open source today, but it might not be open source in the future, in future versions. So add someone that can check the community and, for instance, verify that the copyright in the software is not centralized in the hand of a single entity. That's a very good point for long-term sustainability of your involvement with that piece of code. But that part is for when you decide what to use yourself. The other part is which license to pick when you release software to the public. And there, I think it's very good to have essentially a centralized authority, a centralized open source program office or competence center, as it's been called before today, in your organization at the country level, if possible, or even at the EU level, actually says, these are the 2 or 3 licenses, one for each kind of strategy you want to pick, and just stick to those. And last point, in terms of strategy, I think in general for public administration, copyleft is a very good strategy to make sure that software that's been developed using public money remains available, again, not only today, but in the very long term.
Very good, thank you, Stefano. So we've checked the box on promote legal certainty, again, within the recommendations. The last 2 are around multilingual EU environment and also the common solution building blocks, that's 9 and 6 respectively, inverted. Again, I'm going to piggyback on some really good questions that came up here. So for Bogdan, the question I asked earlier around how can the European Commission better leverage the examples you eloquently exposed today in Romania. And then with regards to Boris, so the cultural interoperability across borders, the question was, fine, interesting, what about within organizations themselves in one single country? There seems to be a challenge there to be tackled.
So when I'm thinking what can the European Union do better to help this kind of movements and to help open source in a country like Romania, I'm thinking of 3 areas. The first problem in Romania, and I assume in countries similar to Romania, is that there is little awareness of open source and its advantages in public administration. And this kind of events help, but also going directly to public officials, training them and telling them the story of what open source can do for them goes a long way. And it's something for me or my organizations to go. It's something else for the European Union to carry that message because it comes with more authority. So that's the first level. The second is capacity. If we convince tomorrow, let's not say 10, but 2 municipalities in Romania to go open source or to go 50% open source, do they have the capacity to do that? I'm going to tell you they don't right now. And so we need to take them by the hand and we need to help them get there. And I think there was an amazing presentation earlier on how Italy was able to do that. And it took some time and it took strategic thinking. And I think there are a lot of resources that are needed there and leadership. And that's where the European Union can, again, come in. And the third part is for all the projects that we showcase, and especially for a data portal, we give our work pro bono, it's for free, but then those municipalities need to administer those tools. So most probably they will apply for EU funding, they will work with European Union in order to build the infrastructure to develop that and to build on that.
Lovely, thank you. Boris.
To come to your question, I think language in a general sense is one of the main barriers to reuse of software in any way. And I think this is not just because we speak different languages, but it's also because there is something about public administrations and how they are organizations that are, they have their own domain and they have their own legislation and they have their own sort of policy that they adhere to, which makes them especially prone to have jargon to a very intense degree. And so what I often find is that in public administration software projects, it is programmed with very specific terminology that doesn't make sense to anyone outside of even that organization. So one of the things which we recommend is what we say, use plain English. Think about the community of software developers that a codebase is going to end up in. Think about the community of users, of policymakers that a codebase is going to end up in, and really write for them, for people outside of your organization. Because nothing is ever going to get reused if it uses all your own terminology. Like, you need to be able to translate that outwards. And this is especially hard for then if you're an English language organization, then you need to figure out where does your jargon lie. But my experience is actually that if you think that you cannot write it up any other way, that it's often jargon and that you need to really explain it. and think about this. So finding good practices around explaining what the function is of your code, as opposed to the way that you organize it inside of your own policy machine is really crucial for any kind of reuse.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'm getting instructions, so I will follow through. We have a couple of minutes left, so I think we've run out of time to do sort of a knee-jerk reaction from all of you in terms of summarizing. So if I may, I'll take the liberty perhaps just giving a couple of thoughts. And one is, first of all, to thank DG Gigit and also the EU presidency, Romania, for pulling this thing together in the first place. This is the first of its kind, focusing on open source. Rather timely in that within the next couple of years, we see that there's going to be more open source produced than proprietary software. So really, it comes at a perfect time. There's a tipping point, and it's really the right place, the right time to do this. The other point I'd like to make is, of course, Romania has teed this up beautifully for Finland to sort of drive down the fairway. There is, of course, the second anniversary of the Tallinn Declaration, which talks all about open source, open standards, and better helping public sector to, again, unlock their potential both within ministries, within countries, borders, but also across the union. So if I may ask you to put your hands together and thank our wonderful panel in the customary way. Thank you.